The Minister of Trade and Industry, Dr. Rob Davis. Please a big round of applause for the Minister, ladies and gentlemen. Also on my panel this afternoon, I have the Deputy Head of the Wits Business School, Professor Carlo Oja. Professor, a very good afternoon. Thank you. I'm also joined by Frontier Advisory Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Martin Davis. Dr. Davis, good afternoon. As well as Chief Economist at Econometrics, Dr. Azar Jamin. Good afternoon, Dr. Jamin. Thank you. What I will do, though, is I'm going to ask the Vice Chancellor of Wits University at this time, Professor Adam Habib, just to give us a nice warm welcome before we get underway. A big round of applause for Professor Adam Habib.
And it's a particularly important engagement because for the one moment in history, there's a potential for a significant change in the global order. For the first time in centuries, the developing world and 5 or 6 countries within the developing world in particular have such significant power that the developed world is no longer in a position to easily impose its hegemony on the rest of the world order. That for the first time, there is the possibility that we could have a true engagement between the South and the North. If we do it properly, we have the potential for the first time on a global plane to create the possibilities for inclusive development. It is also particularly important that we begin to talk across institutional boundaries, that governments and academics and the corporate sector begin to engage across institutional boundaries to understand some of their own challenges and their own ambitions, institutional ambitions, but to simultaneously recognize that their own institutional ambitions can only be truly realized in a sustainable way if the broader world order works in an inclusive direction. And that's, it seems to me, is this moment, which is why workshops like this are so crucial.
At this time, let me ask the Honorable Comrade Obed Bapela, the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, to come through and also give us his opening remarks on this one. A big round of applause for him, please.
Is this BRICS going to be an elite organization, only heads of states and governments, meeting alone? Or these side meetings that happen, do they contribute? Do those issues raised inside meetings, finding expressions inside, is it enough and adequate? Or should we allow all partners not to be inside so that we don't have a G8, another G20 that excludes civil society, and then so forth? So I think that issue ought also to be engaged and debated.
At this point, please allow me to welcome onto the podium the Honorable Dr. Rob Davis, Member of Parliament, Minister of Trade and Industry. A big round of applause for the Minister.
South Africa's presence in the BRICS has come at a very fortunate time for us because we've come in as the BRICS was moving from a forum of discussing coordination of positions on international matters to actually starting to discuss a program of cooperation within the BRICS itself. And we've come in at a moment when we have a historical opportunity to help shape an agenda of intra-BRICS cooperation. But the future's got to be one where we move and industrialize the continent, where we have to move from primary production into value-added production. Also, we need an infrastructure program because the connections, particularly between our economies, are inadequate. From our side, we have an ambition to create a different pattern of engagement with BRICS countries than the conventional pattern we often have. We are focusing on complementarity in trade. We are focusing on investments that support productive sector development. All this is located in the context of our vision of African industrialization and regional integration. And I think that the fact is that we came in at the right time to begin to influence and shape this agenda. Whether we succeed or not obviously depends on a whole lot of other factors, but I think that we have some open doors and some advantages that we could take into account as we move further forward. Thank you very much.
South Africa is the least endowed, capital-wise, among the 5. If South Africa gets access to these funds and speed up its growth, particularly looking at the provision of funds at the SME level,
current global economic order, whether we like it or not, big markets are attractive to capital. It's very simple. Capital is attractive to demographics. I'm deeply concerned about the future of small countries in Africa. Deeply concerned. It's imperative that we as 50-odd million people align our membership of BRICS with the regional integration strategy around SADC, particularly SADC. 285 million people. 285. We're bigger than Indonesia, we're bigger than Turkey, we're bigger than Mexico, other aspirant members. It's imperative we do that. And it's not just imperative for us, it's imperative for other regions of the continent as well. Otherwise, these economies, I'm afraid, will disappear and there'll be no development whatsoever. So first, integration, bread to BRICS. Cost of labor per month, average in rand terms, again, depreciated rand, probably about 7,500 rand a month. That's expensive. Chinese labor is no longer cheap. So where's the manufacturing going? Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., etc. Questions for us, are we going to, or is Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, whoever, going to become the Vietnam of Africa? We are on the cusp of an industrial revolution, 19th century style, if only we realized it, within the BRICS, particularly China. Who is winning in Africa? Is it the Chinese, the Indians, the Brazilians, the Russians maybe, or us? I'd argue it's us, and I'll tell you why. And this is not state-driven, this is market-driven. Minister mentioned Standard Bank. Biggest retail bank in the continent, Standard Bank, presence in what, 18, 19 countries? Biggest shareholder, single largest shareholder, ICBC, the world's biggest bank, Chinese. That's a partnership that came about through private business-to-business sector, apolitical. So all these partnerships have evolved. There's many more I can talk to, which have been default between business to business, China-Africa partnerships, which are apolitical and non-state. The challenges for BRICS now is for us to be proactive. And what is our biggest problem in this country? And I say this often, and please, if you disagree with me, please say so. Our biggest challenge of this country is the low-trust political economy we have. Business and government just don't seem to get on, never mind labor. That's our biggest impediment to competitiveness. If we can start to get this right, we can start to shape, not so much by default, but rather design, South Africa's true interest, which the Minister spoke about, but ultimately benefiting all of us as employees, as shareholders, as companies in our own region, with our BRICS collaborators, but also, sadly, competitors as well.
South Africa's trade with the rest of Africa is ballooning. I think that's one of the most positive aspects of the economic situation in South Africa right now. And that ballooning of trade with Africa stems from the fact that South African companies themselves have taken the initiative to invest in the rest of Africa. They set up subsidiaries in Lagos, in Accra, in Nairobi, in Kampala, whatever the case may be, and those subsidiaries in turn import South African goods and services, and that is where we are benefiting. And therefore it is absolutely vital, I think, for South Africa to build on its membership of BRICS, to try and open up the involvement of the rest of Africa in this whole BRICS initiative. This poses an enormous challenge for BRICS, and that is to overcome the legacy of developing countries being corrupt. And South Africa, despite everything that is perceived to be going on, can still hold a torch to media freedom, judicial freedom, openness of society that many of the other BRICS countries do not actually possess. And in that way, I think South Africa has an enormous contribution to make in terms of improving the governance of developing countries as a whole.
If China was not as interested and as pervasive in Africa as it is today, would the traditional world be as interested in us as they are now? Probably not. The Chinese, if anything, it's quite the opposite, have absolutely no intent to politically control any African institution, state or region. And that's the definition of colonialism. a colonial political control. Anything but. There's a true alignment of strategic developmental interest in Africa and China's resource-intensive growth model. We're now exiting it because the commodity super cycle has left us, or is busy departing. The train's going out the station. And the question for African states is, did we really benefit? Because there's never going to be another China. Never. The last decade or so has been incredibly economically enabling for our continent, and there will never be another China.
The finance ministers were asked to present a feasibility study at the summit. They did that, and the decision was taken, not just thank you very much, there's a feasibility study, now we'll go ahead and negotiate everything else. The decision was we go ahead with it. And now we look at all the other issues. And I think that's a very, very important thing. All I can say is what is our ambition, because it hasn't been negotiated. Our ambition is that it is a bank which operates not just in South Africa, but in other emerging economies, other developing countries, particularly on the African continent, and is available to support infrastructure development. That's what we're looking at.
Let us build on the opportunity that has been provided by BRICS. I do have problems in understanding the concept, but hell, we're a small country and we've been incorporated into a club of big countries. Let's take advantage of this now.